want is right here. We gon' give them what they came for. We gon' take it up from last year. Shoot 'em my shot, boy, I'm long range. Me and the team on the same.
Bacon and basketball raising the levels of intensity to an all-new level as we move from the Sweet 16 to the Elite Eight. I'm Mike Waddell along with David Glenn. This is the North Carolina Sports Network. And our focus is the state of North Carolina, but also the Atlantic Coast Conference is a big part of that, with the conference office being in Charlotte. And this year, not one, not two, but three Atlantic Coast Conference teams are in the NCAA men's basketball tournament's Elite Eight. And David, did the pundits get it wrong about the ACC? Because the Tigers, Wolfpack, and Blue Devils are really peaking at the right time.
Yeah, man. Sometimes I felt like I was howling alone in the wilderness, Mike, as we pounded this drum for about 3 months straight. But my main point in January and in February remains my main point here at the end of March, and it's this. Even if the national pundits were correct that the ACC was not as dominant as its usual self when you measure it from 1 through 15, remember, sites like KenPom place equal weight from top to bottom. They're kind of evaluating your average team, if you will. From 1 through 15, the ACC was not a special league. If you measure it that way, it was not. Louisville was really, really, really bad. Others really, really, really struggled. And that, of course, weighs down your average in a way that was not the case, say, for the Big 12 or the Big East, which were often the national media's darlings. But my main point then is my main point now. Your average team doesn't matter. Your 1 through 15 doesn't matter once the NCAA tournament begins. The conversation needs to switch entirely to how many did you get in and how good are those teams? And Carolina earned a number 1 seed for a lot of good reasons and made the Sweet 16. Duke had that weird 2-game stretch, but prior to that weird 2-game stretch, they were truly, by the metrics, by the eyeball test, one of the best teams in the country, period, up there next to UConn and a couple of others. That's how good they were, not for a little bit, but for most of February and early March. Clemson earned a 6 seed. And yes, they had a couple of stubbed toes late. But if you looked at their body of work, you knew, as we told you here on the North Carolina Sports Network, this was one of the best half dozen teams in Clemson basketball history. And it has proven to be that, still standing in the Elite Eight. Now, I'll give people the benefit of the doubt if they did not see this Wolfpack freight train coming. I mean, I saw them for 5 straight days in D.C., so I changed my opinion of them there. But when they lost 7 of their last 9 in the regular season, no, nobody, I don't know anybody who saw all of this coming from NC State. But the point remains the same. You have to forget the bottom 5 teams. You have to forget the middle 5 teams. All that mattered were the 5 who made it. And we accurately told everybody Virginia was not very good. Doesn't mean they didn't deserve to make it. Your body of work determines whether you deserve a bid. Their body of work was good enough. They got a bid. We just all knew they were going to faceplant, and they did. Those other 4 teams, for different reasons in different ways, were all very dangerous teams. I respect the top of the Big East. I respect the top of the Big 12. But that's all that matters in March, right, is the top of your league, the teams that do get in. And that's where I think the national pundits were mostly off with their negativity during the regular season, because they either ignored or forgot that that bottom 2/3 of your league just stops mattering come the month of March.
Our first college football playoff semifinal. The first Elite Eight game involving an ACC team is Clemson and Dabo's alma mater, Alabama. I don't think anybody saw this one coming.
Yeah, I think you could have won a lot of money in a bar bet betting on an all-important, big spotlight Clemson-Alabama football game before you get one on the basketball side. But let's give these guys credit. Nate Oates has been building something at Alabama, and Brad Brownell, in a much different way over 14 years, has been building something at Clemson. And I want to bring this point up because it matters to Brad Brownell more than most. For 71 years of Clemson's membership in the ACC, Mike, we were playing under a set of rules where most teams were signing high school prospects. You might have an occasional junior college guy, but remember the rules for almost forever, where if you signed a major college transfer, he had to sit out a year. So if you were the Clemson basketball coach at a football-first school in a little city by the lake in South Carolina, I don't care if your name was Tates Locke or Cliff Ellis or Oliver Purnell or somebody else. It was hard to recruit a lot of top-level basketball players to a football-first school under those circumstances in the southeastern United States in a small town, especially when you're going against the likes of Duke and Carolina, who signed prep All-Americans left and right. And later, Jim Boeheim at Syracuse for a while, Rick Pitino at Louisville for a while, more Hall of Fame coaches you have to deal with. It's really hard to win there. In the portal era with immediate eligibility and that bonus COVID year, guess what? Rather than in the old days, you had to wait for your high school, even if you wisely recruited from the high school ranks. You had to develop those guys most of the time for 2 or 3 years before they gave you your best basketball. That worked to the disadvantage of schools like Clemson, again, under a different set of rules. Well, I give Brad Brownell credit for this. 7 of his top 9 are homegrown, the old-fashioned way. Signed him out of the high school ranks. He developed P.J. Hall. He developed Ian Shefflin. He developed Chase Hunter. Those are hugely important guys, 3 of the most key guys for the Tigers. But under the new rules, Brad Brownell wasn't just stuck without the ability to add to that nice nucleus. And utilizing the new rules, what did he do? He signed a really talented, great leader, sharpshooter, fifth-year guard from Syracuse named Joe Girard. And he signed a fifth-year NC State forward, 6'10", with long arms and athletic. He's been a key defender for the Tigers named Jack Clark. It's blending the old way with a new set of rules that have only been in play for a handful of years. Voila, the guy that everybody was telling Clemson's fans is a good coach, he just didn't always have enough talent, gets enough talent, and where is he? He's in the Elite Eight with a chance, for only the second time in school history, with a chance to take the Tigers to the Final Four against an Alabama team that we just saw. We told you going into the Carolina game, they have one of the best offenses in the country, period. They proved it. The Tar Heels chose to run with them. It went down to the wire. Crimson Tide made one more basket. But it is a phenomenal story. And I think the new world that we're living in made it possible for both Alabama and Clemson, football-first schools, but playing under different rules like everybody else in a way that made it more possible for them to get where they want to go in the sport of men's basketball.
We're taping today's Bacon and Basketball show brought to you by the North Carolina Port Council before the Alabama-Clemson game, but our focus is really on the teams on your screen, North Carolina State and Duke. And this is an all-ACC regional final, but is this a unique thing? Has this ever happened before, David?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Mike. This will be maybe my shortest answer. So quick and dirty. It has happened 3 times before. You know how dominant this league has been for many decades. It does have the best winning percentage in the history of the NCAA tournament. If you want to go back to 1939, it also has 3 of the last 8 national champions, if you just want to stay within the last decade. It also has this year's incredible run. And oh, by the way, 2 years ago, there was another incredible postseason run for the ACC after a lot of negativity from the national pundits during the regular season. The answer is this is the 4th time we've ever had an all-ACC Elite Eight matchup. The Wolfpack's most famous team ever was actually involved in the first. And I know you're nodding your head because you were a young man growing up in North Carolina at the time. The 1983 Cardiac Pack of Jimmy V. After beating the Virginia Cavaliers in the ACC tournament, back when Terry Holland's UVA team was top 5 in the national rankings, the Wolfpack, of course, 3 games in 3 days back then to win the ACC title. They get a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament. And then sure enough, it's the Cavaliers standing there again in the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament. Of course, famously, the Wolfpack eliminated the Cavaliers and went on to become one of the great Cinderella stories in the history of college basketball. The only other 2 examples were more recent and in the same year. It was 2016. Carolina beat Notre Dame in the Elite Eight to get to the Final Four. And remember, Syracuse beat Virginia. It was a low-seeded Syracuse team of Jim Boeheim shocking Tony Bennett's Cavaliers in the Elite Eight, so that both the Orange and the Heels made that 2016 Final Four. So this Duke State matchup, we don't have many things left given ACC's deep and rich history where we get to say this is only the fourth time something has ever happened. But it's pretty cool for our purposes that it's not only the fourth time it's ever happened, but it's two teams facing each other right here in our backyard.
What makes NC State and Duke different from the other regional finals this weekend, the 8 teams vying to go on to Phoenix in the Final Four?
That's a great question, man. The obvious is that they're neighbors, right? But 2 quick things on that. One, Mike, I think you, as a longtime athletic director and a former athlete yourself, you'd probably agree with me that nerves, good old-fashioned nerves, have impacted this NCAA tournament. Oh. I mean, Marquette looked like it was playing with the weight of the world on its shoulders, protecting that number 2 seed, heavy favorite against the Wolfpack. Those guys were taking shots they don't usually take. They were missing shots that they usually make. There was nothing free-flowing about the Golden Eagles against the Wolfpack. Meanwhile, the Wolfpack's smiling. They're playing with house money. They're high-fiving each other. They didn't look nervous to me. I do think that one thing that differentiates this Wolfpack Blue Devil matchup from the other 3 Elite Eight matchups is that when you see nothing but familiar faces on the other side, I know the environment is different, the pressure is different, the stage is bigger, more millions are watching. But you just see, if you're a Wolfpack player, oh, that's Kyle Filipowski, that's Jeremy Roach, that's Tyrese Proctor. If you're a Blue Devil player, oh, that's DJ Burns, that's DJ Horn. In some cases, these guys have known each other and played against each other for multiple years. I think that minimizes the nerves factor. Whereas in most settings, you're seeing referees you're not as familiar with, an arena you're not as familiar with, and usually an opponent you're not as familiar with. So that's one of the 2 biggest differences. The other, and you've known a lot of coaches, you've had to hire them, you've had to fire them. All coaches I know in the sport of basketball will talk about the massive difference between the 4-day prep for whoever you face on Thursday or Friday, right? You knew your opponent back on Sunday at the latest. So you and your staff, that's a lot of time to communicate with study their tendencies, right? Circle things on video, have video sessions with your players, know your personnel, scouting reports for this guy who loves to go to his left, or this guy who prefers going for his right, or this guy has this counter move, or this guy doesn't like going to his left or his right, or we're afraid to foul this guy because he shoots 90%. But under pressure, we'd rather shoot this guy because he shoots 40% from the line. All that stuff. You have 4 days to do that in the NCAA tournament format for your Sweet 16 opponent or for your round of 64 opponent. You have 1 day to do it for your round of 32 opponent or for your Elite Eight opponent. And, of course, there are assistant coaches that are asked to advance scout. I'm not saying it's 100% compressed into 24 hours, but all these coaches will tell you they love, they're control freaks. They love the 4 days compared to the 1 day. And in this particular case, this matchup between the Wolfpack and the Blue Devils is different because the squeeze timetable doesn't matter. It matters a lot for some of those other games, right? In some of those cases, they don't know each other at all. At least Clemson and Alabama, remember, did play each other during the regular season. So they weren't starting from scratch on their scouting reports. But some of these others were. They haven't faced each other this season. They might not have faced each other at all. The 1 day compression doesn't really impact this matchup hardly at all. And the familiarity minimizes the nerves. So I think it's just another good old-fashioned Tobacco Road basketball game without those complications that we'll see in most of the rest of the Elite Eight.
Well, here's my fun fact. It's the first time in ACC history that the same 2 teams have played 3 times in 1 calendar month, 3 times in 27 days. And I want to go back to something that you said. It was probably the best point that you made in a series of great points in your wrap-up of the Duke Sweet 16 game. And that was early in that affair, John Shire notices that his team is nervous. They're making mistakes. and the young head coach calls a very seasoned timeout. That, to me, along with the injury afflicted by the Duke opponent, but that timeout really set the stage to get the confidence and the mental clarity in play for Duke. They're a very tough team to beat. They're that team you talked about from the regular season that occasionally went off the rails a little bit, but it seems like right now, and again, they've had an easy path to this point, or an easier path than most, but this Duke team really impressed me the other day.
Yeah, and I thought the Jon Scheyer timeout was essential because even his senior guard, Jeremy Roach, did two things he almost never does in about a 60-second span. He dribbled off his own body for one turnover, sent Houston the other way, and then he threw the ball truly all the way over all of his teammates' heads, almost into the stands. It landed in media row. That was all within a 90-second period. Meanwhile, Tyrese Proctor's taking a long three-pointer early in the shot clock while Houston's attacking the rim at the other end every single possession. That was not the way Jon Scheyer wanted to see that game start. He calls the timeout, and everything shifted pretty dramatically after that. But you mentioned the two Wolfpack Blue Devil head-to-head matchups this year, and you're right, it is crazy. They have both come in the month of March. Quickly on the first one, I want to remind people, this was March 4th, at PNC Arena in Raleigh. This was the big Duke win, 79-64, Blue Devils over the Wolfpack. This, remember, was the last game of that Duke stretch that I was describing earlier, where the Blue Devils won 8 of 9 games, and they played one of the best teams in the country in February and even early March. That's when their metrics over that 9-game period were up there next to UConn's nationally. That was a little preview of why they're one of the 8 teams still standing at this stage of the big dance. This was also the next to last game of an NC State stretch in which the Wolfpack lost 7 of 9 games before heading to the ACC tournament. So as you might guess, it was Duke by a lot over the Wolfpack. In this game, Duke decided that they were not going to let DJ Burns turn into the master passer that he had been at times previously and that he certainly has been since then. For the most part, the Blue Devils were not going to double team DJ Burns and risk him finding open teammates, which obviously he's done a lot of lately here in the big dance. Sure enough, Burns was the Wolfpack's offensive star in the March 4th game, but the Wolfpack lost by 15 points, which means Jon Scheyer made a smart tactical decision. Give DJ his points, but the Blue Devils win the game. Burns had a game high for either side, 27 points, shot a very efficient 12 of 19 from the field, but Duke's guards outplayed State's guards, and that was the ball game, really. Duke's defense was running the Wolfpack shooters off the three-point line, and it worked. Michael O'Connell had only 3 points. DJ Horn had only 8 points. Casey Marcel had only 9 points. The Wolfpack only attempted 9 three-pointers in the entire game, making only 3. Meanwhile, although Jeremy Roach did not have a great shooting night from three-point land, he scored 21 points on 9 of 17 shooting, more by taking his man off the dribble, getting to the basket, sometimes pulling up for those mid-range jumpers that he's been known for. Roach also had 3 assists and 0 turnovers in that game. Freshman guard Jared McCain had a good game, 14 of his 16 points in the second half as the Blue Devils pulled away from the Wolfpack. Plus, McCain, as usual, rebounded well with 5 boards, 2 assists, and again, no turnovers. As a team, the Devils hit only 9 of their 33-point attempts, 30%, but they won big anyway. The other interesting wrinkle, and then we'll move on to that ACC tournament matchup, in the Duke win at PNC Arena, was that it was one of the freshman forward Sean Stewart's 2 best games of the entire season. He's been mostly invisible. Duke's bench has been mostly invisible. They got a nice lift against Houston by Ryan Young, but for the most part, since Caleb Foster's injury at the end of the regular season, Duke hasn't known what it was going to get from its bench. Against the Wolfpack in Raleigh, Stewart played 26 minutes and ended up with 12 points, 5 boards, 3 blocked shots, 2 steals, and an assist. Stewart recently did play well in the Blue Devils' blowout of James Madison in the round of 32 here in the Big Dance. So perhaps he can help Duke off the bench in the Elite Eight the way Young did help against Houston. In some games, again, the the Blue Devils have not known what they're getting from their bench. State really relies on Ben Middlebrooks and Jaden Taylor as a big guy and a perimeter player, two reliable guys that they have a good sense of what the Wolfpack is going to get from them. That would be advantage Wolfpack in this weekend's matchup. We'll see if Stewart can change that formula for the Blue Devils. On March 4th, Duke turned the ball over only 5 times and shot 47% from the field. And oh, by the way, the Blue Devils got 21 points off the Wolfpack's 10 turnovers. That made all the difference. When Kevin Keats says one of the biggest changes of his team has been cutting down on their own mistakes, that's what he's talking about. You can't just hand 21 points to Duke with your turnovers that they turn into fast break baskets. That was truly the difference in a game the Blue Devils won in Raleigh by 15 points. The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up.
So that's the first game between NC State and Duke. That was a Blue Devils win in Raleigh. The second one came up when you were in D.C. for the ACC tournament, and Duke did not have success there. That's because NC State was just starting what has become now an 8-game winning streak for the Red and White.
Yeah, the bottom line there from the Duke perspective is that the Blue Devils guards just simply did not play well. Casey Morcell, DJ Horn, remember, came off the bench in that game and scored 18 points. And Michael O'Connell was really good as well. 4 assists, no turnovers, 12 points for O'Connell. Morcell, 11 points, also great defense against those Duke guards. Meanwhile, Jeremy Roach had only 5 points. Jared McCain had only 8 points. That was the game he played with the bandage over his head because he bumped heads with Jalen Blakes, his own teammate, in a weird pregame freak accident. Tyrese Proctor had only 10 points in that game and shot 4 for 16 from the field. So even though Kyle Filipowski was great against the Wolfpack up in D.C., 28 points and 14 rebounds, Mark Mitchell was great against the Wolfpack up in D.C., 18 points and 8 rebounds. When State's guards so thoroughly outplayed the Blue Devils guards, kind of like the Tar Heels had outplayed the Blue Devils guards in that senior night win in Durham, the bottom line was going to be the Wolfpack had a chance. And the Wolfpack got pushed over the top for a lot of different reasons. Remember how long it took Kevin Keats to settle on his starting lineup, where Michael O'Connell, the point guard, and Mo Diarra, the power forward, they were complementary players for a while earlier this season. Well, now O'Connell's been playing 35-plus minutes a game. He was great against Duke in D.C. Mo Diarra has been playing 35-plus minutes a game. He was great against Duke in D.C. 14 points, 16 rebounds, 4 blocked shots, and 3 steals. So that was, in the midst of the Wolfpack 5 wins in 5 days stunner, one of the great underdog performances in ACC tournament history. That was the clicking of a starting lineup that Kevin Keats had started to use down the stretch, but really came together in Washington, D.C. in magical fashion. Meanwhile, the Blue Devils' biggest problem really was their guard play. 2-game stretch. Were the Devils going to get back to the dominant performances that they had prior to that 2-game stretch, or was this season going to go off the rails? We already have our answer to that. Those guards have bounced back. McCain had that record-setting 3-point shooting night earlier in the tournament. Roach has bounced back and regained his confidence, with the exception maybe of that shaky start against Houston, but he did come back to help the Devils beat the Cougars in that one. Guard play always matters in March. Guard play is going to go a long way toward determining what happens in this round 3 between the Devils and the Wolfpack. because when the state guards were shaky and turning it over in Raleigh, the Blue Devils poured it on. When the state guards were not only better, but a lot better than Duke's 3 starting guards up in D.C., it was the Wolfpack in a close one, but thanks to DJ Horn and some good shooting and some good defense, it was the Wolfpack 74, the Blue Devils 69 up in Washington, D.C., as the Wolfpack, of course, went on to win that 71st ACC tournament.
So it's the American Airlines Center in Dallas, Texas, a little after 5 Eastern time on Easter Sunday, the 11 seed North Carolina State Wolfpack and the 4 seed Duke Blue Devils. Let's go with the Cinderella story. But they say they're not the Cinderella, but I guess they are. NC State. What are your North Carolina Port Council keys to the game for NC State to make the first Final Four since 1983?
Well, it's kind of ride the wave, which is not a breakdown as much as continue to enjoy the moment, continue to enjoy the us against the world mentality, continue to share DJ Burns's big smile with the rest of the world, and just continue to try to ride this magic carpet as far as you can take it. But in terms of personnel, obviously you need a plan for Kyle Filipowski. He's a 7-foot guy who can hit 3-pointers, who can score down low, who can pass the ball. You need a plan for him. Mo Diarra is an athletic 6'11" guy. His presence in the lineup in a much bigger way than we had earlier this season gives one possible matchup for Kevin Keatts against Filipowski, because I don't think you want DJ Burns dealing with Filipowski very often, if at all. You also need a plan for Jared McCain. I believe Jared McCain will be a first-round NBA draft pick. He was, of course, on the all-freshman team, received a lot of votes for ACC Freshman of the Year, including mine. That 8 3-pointer night earlier in this tournament, which, remember, set the all-time Duke record for an NCAA tournament game, is reflective of how good he can be when you give him some space. If you give him good looks from three-point land, he's going to hit a really high percentage. But he's cultivated his game to the point that even if you crowd him, he can hit you off the dribble, and he's very accurate on those mid-range floaters as well. To me, those would be the 2 focal points of the Wolfpack's defensive game plan. Offensively, I think the key is to go through DJ Burns and see how Duke defends him this time. Remember, Duke rarely double-teamed him in Raleigh, but Duke won that game by a lot. Will they try something similar, or will we see something more like what we saw in Washington, D.C.? DJ Burns, while scoring only 4 points against Marquette, still was one of the most valuable players of that game. Why? He had 7 assists. He got his teammates easy buckets in a game where Marquette, nobody on that team, with the possible exception of their point guard, Tyler Kolek, helped their teammates get any easy baskets. That leads to low percentage shots. That leads to loss of confidence in your shooting. And that leads to tension and stress rather than just letting it all hang out. DJ Burns from an X and O standpoint, DJ Burns from an emotional standpoint should be that focal point for the Wolfpack, at least, for whatever stretch of minutes he plays. Sometimes that's 25 minutes. In that overtime game against Oakland, it was 40-plus minutes. I think DJ has at least one more in him, and he would tell you that. But those are among my keys to the game as the Wolfpack tries to knock off the Blue Devils for the second time in a row.
And what about Duke? What are their keys to the game? Because they're kind of expected to win.
Maybe. I think Coach Shire saw something he didn't like in the Blue Devils early in that game against Houston, called that timeout that we discussed, and got them back on track. I think this is a little bit easier. I think this is more back to what we described earlier, where it's obviously it's not getting together on a playground on the outskirts of Raleigh or somewhere here in the Triangle. The stage is too big for that. But I really think it's more about the basketball. It's less about the nerves. It's less about studying a new opponent or know your personnel, as we like to say. These guys know each other inside out, upside down, in some cases over multiple years. So the Blue Devils, to me, offensively, it would be remember who your 2 best players are, Kyle Filipowski and Jared McCain. With all due respect to Jeremy Roach, who's still a reliable player and a dangerous three-point shooter when he's open, this team has to accept that Filipowski is a special talent, McCain is a special talent, and they can't stray too far from that. Mark Mitchell should have a secondary role, an important one, but he doesn't need to hunt his shot. Tyrese Proctor should have a secondary role, not the 16 shots he took against the Wolfpack up at the ACC tournament. He needs to remember he's a good player and an important player, and the ball is in his hands. And he was a key part of that win in Raleigh. But he was a key part, in part, because he remembered that as the floor leader, as the general, as the distributor, you can never forget Filipowski is your main man down low. McCain is your main man on the perimeter. And, of course, if Jeremy Roach is open from three-point land, you got to get him the ball as well. This is about beating your man off the dribble, not settling for early shot clock three-pointers the way Proctor did early in that Houston game. But Duke has to remember it has the advantage offensively in this game. I know the Wolfpack has held, I think it's 5 straight opponents now to 40% or less from the field. Duke is one of those teams that is skilled enough offensively to break that trend. You know, Houston was one of the best teams in the country. Devils didn't put up a huge number, obviously, but Filipowski with enough creative plays, Roach with enough creative plays, McCain with enough skill, that was enough to overcome even the number 1 defense in the country. Be who you are, Duke, and that is an elite offensive team. But don't stray too far from those 2 key guys. And then defensively, it's up to Jon Scheyer. Is he going to take the approach he took in Raleigh? You know, let DJ get his points. We're just not letting anybody else get the open shots that DJ can find them for. That worked in Raleigh. It worked really, really well. Now, NC State's going to have a counter for that might be different than the counter that they had on March 4th. But that's a big tactical decision for Jon Scheyer early in this game. I think you have to defensively put your best defender on DJ Horn on the perimeter, and then make sure that you have some help for DJ Burns at least some of the time. I think DJ is such a smart player that if you either never double him or always double him, you're playing into his hands because he's a 6th-year college player. He has a counter for either of those 2 things. Jon Scheyer's defensive players are smart enough that they could rotate, right? Sometimes you do double them, sometimes you don't. But it shouldn't be a mechanical thing where DJ knows what's coming. Those would be the keys to the game from the Duke perspective. In my eyes, Duke is the better team, but the Wolfpack is just as confident as the Blue Devils right now, and that makes this one fascinating to watch. Whether you are moving locally, nationally, or even internationally, and whether you're a residential or commercial customer, please consider our friends at XL Moving and Storage, an award-winning Allied Van Lines agent with offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. Thanks to their 25 years of experience helping North Carolinians all across the state with their moving and storage needs, XL has become the trusted hometown North Carolina moving services company. Our good friends Jim Dorsett and Jody Hatley, along with their hardworking staff, offer customized, tailored relocation and storage solutions to the people of North Carolina and beyond. Visit them online today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com.
Now, we've talked about NC State, Duke, and Clemson, but the one ACC team that is not playing this weekend is North Carolina. And Tar Heel Nation just doesn't know what to do.
When the Heels as a 1 seed are bounced early and they have to watch their 2 triangle neighbors play in the Elite 8, I'm sure that hurts. And there's a lot of dissection of the details. I think a smart Carolina fan realizes that Cormac Ryan was right at the podium when he said, none of this is possible without RJ Davis. No. The Tar Heels aren't a number 1 seed without RJ Davis. The Tar Heels don't win the regular season title without RJ Davis. The Tar Heels aren't the first 17-3 team in conference play since the league switched to a 20-game schedule without RJ Davis. And you could add Armando Bacot to that as well. Now, did RJ have one of the worst shooting performances of his entire career? Yes, he did. I mean, those things are not mutually exclusive. We don't have to play Pollyanna here. RJ Davis had a horrible shooting game. You don't have to shy away from that just because he's a great player and an All-American and the ACC Player of the Year. Both of those things can be true. He deserves all the praise for what he did, and he deserves the reality, if call it criticism, call it something else if you'd rather, he had a horrible, horrible shooting game at the worst possible time, and his team got eliminated as a result. That's going to be part of his legacy too. These are human beings. They're not robots. Stuff happens. And I've always thought shooting from the perimeter especially is as hard to predict as any other element in college basketball. Defense is more predictable. Low post play can be more predictable. Free throw shooting is usually more predictable. Long range shooting is not. And whether it's, Shammond Williams or Dante Calabria or somebody else from Carolina history, there are a lot of examples of really good shooters who at the wrong time against a quality opponent in the big spotlight had a horrible game. It's life. It's just how stuff happens. Now, you can, if you're going to nitpick, Jalen Withers taking a 3-point shot from the top of the key with 1 minute to go in a game the Tar Heels are leading against Alabama. That is as inappropriate a shot as I have ever seen in a big game in my 37 years covering college basketball. That is just a nonsensical shot. You have RJ Davis on the floor, and to his credit, while having a bad night, if he wanted to take one more shot, he deserved to take one more shot. You have Armando Bacot on the floor. You have Cormac Ryan and Harrison Ingram, two not only great 3-point shooters in the abstract, but they had both shot well that night. Those are the other 4 guys on the court. I think Jalen Withers had made 4 3-pointers all season. That is as outrageously a bad mental mistake as, again, I've ever seen in 37 years of covering this stuff. Why did Hubert Davis not have Seth Trimble on the court more often when he made his 2 3-pointers earlier in the game? Why did Paxson Wojcik, in a lineup that Carolina had rarely used all season, why did he get more minutes? And I know he hit his 3. Credit to him under pressure for hitting that 3. But the Tar Heels needed great athletic defenders. That's exactly what Seth Trimble is. And he's not a guy who hunts his shot. I thought that was an extremely curious coaching decision. But again, that doesn't mean Hubert Davis doesn't deserve credit for being the ACC Coach of the Year. It doesn't mean he doesn't deserve credit for changing the culture of a locker room that was toxic and negative a year ago in one of the most disappointing seasons in Carolina history, and wonderful and together and chemistry positive during what was a very good season with a disappointing ending. All of those things can be true. You can both praise Hubert Davis in the 10 different ways he deserves praise and question him for a very questionable decision under pressure in a big game that turned out to be decided by a very small margin. You can praise RJ Davis and Armando Bacot for 9 combined years of a lot of good things and some great things, including a regular season title and, and a run to the national championship game a couple years ago, while also questioning why Bacot missed a dunk late or couldn't convert on some late offensive possessions or got beat at the other end by a North Dakota State transfer with an ugly mustache.
Looks like Pete Chilcutt Jr.
I roll my eyes at those who can only see one or the other. They can only see the good, and nobody should ever criticize Hubert or RJ or Armando, or they can only see the bad and they forget all the great things that they did. Wow. You must live really interesting lives, because nothing in life works that way. If you're only going to see one side or the other, Ed, you are going to live a miserable existence, and you're going to be unfair to a lot of great coaches, players, and teams, and that's not what this stuff is supposed to be all about.
That's David Glenn. I'm Mike Waddell. This has been Bacon and Basketball, presented by the North Carolina Port Council on the North Carolina Sports Network.
This is the moment we waited for. Everything you want is right here. We gon' give them what they came for. We gon' take it up from last year. Shoot on my shot, boy, I'm long range. Me and the team on the same thing. Stay down, never switched up.